All right, today's discussion, we're going to start with the basics of the cardiovascular system. What we see here is a little bit of what we talked about yesterday when we introduced some of the vocabulary terms. Now we're going to start showing it to you a little bit. This is a diagram of the heart, obviously, and the major vessels. Remember, cardiovascular system means heart and blood vessels. Okay? So that's what we're going to deal in, is those major vessels. Now what's the name for the major vessels that run away from the heart? Vessels away.
Arteries.
Arteries. Arteries away. They start with an A, right? Both of them. So it works. What's the name for the vessels that come back to the heart?
The veins.
Veins. Okay? So we got veins coming back, arteries going out. Now, when you see them in diagrams like this, they do something here. They color code them so you can tell the difference. Okay? The ones that are in red are arteries. Arteries carry blood away from the heart to the body. And why is it going out to the body? What's the purpose?
Give oxygen to all the cells.
To take oxygen. So when the blood has lots of oxygen in it, we call it oxygenated blood. Blood, when it has a lot of oxygen, turns a more red color. Now when it's in your body, that red is limited. Okay? When we see blood when we bleed as being bright red, it's because it's in contact with the oxygen in the air. It gets even brighter red than what it is inside of our arteries. But to make it simple, we go with red for arteries. Okay? So red means it's going away from the heart in the arteries. Okay? Blue is for veins because when it's coming back to the heart, it's been out to the body somewhere, given up that oxygen, and then it's coming back in a state that we call deoxygenated. Okay? It means it's had the oxygen removed. Where'd the oxygen go?
To the cells.
To the cells. That's the whole purpose, is we're taking oxygen out to the cells of the body. So we go out, we drop it off, we come back. This whole thing is called circulatory system. It goes in a circle. It goes out and comes back, always to the heart. Blood goes out, comes back. Arteries go away, veins come back. Okay? So these are the major vessels that go out and back. Now, think about it. If this stuff is going out to the cells of the body, do you think tubes that are this big are going to be able to drop stuff off to cells? Cells are microscopic. They're super duper tiny. You need a microscope to see them. You think pouring blood all over them is going to do a whole lot of good? No. Not to mention, when we start pouring blood somewhere, we're bleeding. That's a bad thing, right? We can all agree that that's a bad thing. Bleeding is bad. We want to keep blood inside our vessels. Okay? That's why we have tubes, to send it out and bring it back. Because we don't want it to go anywhere else. We want it to go out, do its job, come back. We don't want to bleed. Bleeding is bad. Okay? So, these major vessels are the ones that go out and come back. There's basically two different loops that go on here. When it leaves the heart, that vessel, anybody know what that major vessel, the first one going away from the heart, is called?
Aorta.
The aorta. That's the major trunk out of the body. And the reason why I use the word trunk is it's a word that's used medically. It's a trunk, but it also, we can kind of use the analogy of a tree. It's the big central part that everything branches out of. Okay? So the aorta is the trunk, but immediately, what does a tree trunk do?
So it does its different branches.
Branches, right? It starts to split. Well, immediately, the heart, that aorta splits and goes two ways. One up, one down. One loop of it covers everything above the heart. The other loop covers everything below. Goes out there, and it goes out through this artery tree now. We've got the trunk, the aorta. Then it breaks into, most trees have those smaller trunks, but they're still big, huge things, right? We call those arteries. That's what our arteries are the splits off of the main trunk. Okay? Those are the big branches in our tree. Now, when we go out a little further on a tree, what do we get?
Leaves.
Not quite to the leaves yet.
Twigs.
Little stems.
We get twigs and little stems and things like that, right? Okay? Those are the things that we call arterioles. Okay? So things go out to those branches. And those arterioles, that O-L-E or O-L-E ending on things, that ol or ol ending on something, it's what's called a diminutive. It means small. Okay? So arteriole is just a small artery. It's a teeny tiny artery that's carrying blood away. It's still got that A away thing going on, right? We got aorta, we got artery, we got arteriole. It's carrying stuff away from the heart. And when it's going away from the heart, what kind of blood is it carrying?
Oxygenated blood.
Oxygenated blood, right. When we go away, we're headed out. Now, where does a tree end? We go out through the trunk, through the bigger branches, into the little branches and twigs, and we end up where?
Leaves.
Leaves, right? Now, leaves are where everything fans out, right? Now, when we're talking arteries and veins and vessels, these things fan out. We got to get down to where our vessels are so small, they're small enough to touch every cell. This is where the capillaries come in, where everything spreads out into these little webs, just like you see the little webs of veins and things on leaves. Same idea, okay? This stuff spreads out into super duper teeny tiny vessels now. The tubes are tiny. They're so tiny, in fact, that they touch other cells, and they're so thin that the oxygen is able to just, we'll go back to a vocab word. Remember diffusion with cell membranes? Diffusion is when something floats across a cell membrane. Well, what we've gotten is now these arteries on their way out, once they're down to being capillaries, are so tiny that their walls are so thin that the oxygen can just diffuse out of them. It diffuses into the cells, and the carbon dioxide from the cells, remember that's a waste product, right? When we tear up things in cellular respiration, one of the things that's left over, carbon dioxide, that's not good for us, so we have to get rid of it. Guess what? It diffuses into the capillaries. Okay? Now, remember that this is all a circle, though. It's not in a tree, everything just goes out and you end at the leaves, right? Well, in this case, we got a matching tree that comes back, right? Because remember, circulatory system, it's got to go out and come back. So, what are the vessels that come back? Veins. Veins are what come back, right? But this time, we're working our way from the leaves out in the super teeny tiny stuff. We're working our way back to the trunk. So, what did we call the leaves, the spread out, super duper tiny vessels? Capillaries, right? The other side of the capillary, we came in through an arteriole, spreads out to touch every cell, and then it goes out through a tiny vein. How do we say tiny vein?
Venule.
Venule, right. So it comes out of the capillary through a venule, through a tiny vein. Well, now you're working your way back in through the tree. You're now into the twigs. A bunch of twigs come together to make a branch, right? Yeah? Okay, so what do we call branches in our tree here of our circulatory system? What's a major branch? A blood vessel, but what kind? If it's headed back toward the heart and it's a major branch, what do we call it?
A vena.
Veins, right? Venules are tiny veins. Then we got to get into major veins. And then we got to get back, if we're following the tree back down, we get back into the trunk. So what's the big trunk in the body that's headed back to the heart?
Aorta.
Vena cava. There we go. So you see, you can kind of think about this as a tree, except it's a tree that goes out and comes back. Okay? So we go out through our trunk, the aorta. Then we branch off into arteries. And then we go into tiny branches, arterioles. Then we go into the leaves, or into the capillaries. And then we go, on our way back, we go through the other side of the capillary, out through tiny veins, venules. Those come together to make bigger branches, veins. And all the branches come together to make a trunk. The trunk on the vein side is called the vena cava. Okay? So there you go. That's back through most of our talk from yesterday, right? So let's go take a look at some other things. Come on. Everything centers around the heart, right? So we got to talk about the parts of the heart for a second. We just came back from our little trip out through our arteries, arterioles, capillaries, back through the venules, through the veins, through the vena cava, and we are headed back to the heart now. So let's just continue the trip, because we're going around a big circle, right? So we're going to just check out this trip. Okay? Remember? It's coming back to the heart, deoxygenated stuff, right? So it's blue. Vena cava. There's one coming down from your head, one coming up from your body. They meet and go into the heart. Where do they go into the heart? Right atrium. Okay? Remember what the word atrium means. It's an entryway, right? So when we come into the heart, we go in through the atrium, through the entryway. We come in through the right atrium. Now remember, when you're looking at this picture, it's the patient's heart. It's not on your right side of the page when you're looking at it. So when I'm staring this way, it's on my left, because it's the patient's heart, and it's their right side of it, okay? So please don't get that confused. So we got this right atrium. It's just the entryway where the blood comes back into the heart from the body. Okay? Now notice it's still blue, still deoxygenated. Goes into, we're entering a building, we're entering into the heart, right? through the atrium into the heart, the ventricle. This pushes back out. And notice, this is still deoxygenated blood because what do we have to do now? We got to go oxygenate it, right? We got to get the oxygen. So, we got to send it out somewhere to get oxygen. Where does our body get oxygen?
Lungs.
Lungs, right? So we got to send it out to the lungs. Now, we got this nice tube. It's labeled pulmonary artery right here. Talk about labeling itself, right? If you know what those two words stand for, it tells you exactly what's going on, right? Pulmonary talks about what? Lungs, right? Arteries mean what? Blood going away. Arteries away, right? So this is blood going away from the heart to the lungs. Notice how this works? Out it goes. Because it's going to go out of the heart and into your lungs. Okay? So this T shape makes perfect sense for a pulmonary artery. Now, how is this artery different from every other artery you own?
It only goes to the lungs and doesn't expand out.
It goes to the lungs, but it does end up expanding out. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Think about what it carries. What is this blood as it goes out from the heart in this one loop? It's deoxygenated because it's on its way to go pick up oxygen. It's headed out to the oxygen store, the lungs. Okay? So it's headed out. It's the only artery in your body. It's the only place where blood is flowing away from your heart but doesn't have oxygen. It's the only spot. Okay? Goes out to the lungs. The lungs. Now, we'll talk about the lungs more in detail in a minute. It goes out there, picks up oxygen, and then it turns around and comes back. What does that mean lungs have to be made of if it's a spot where the blood turns around and comes back? When it was out in the body, what do we call the spots where the blood turned around?
The vein?
The pulmonary vein.
That's what it's going to come back through, but the spot where it turns around was at the cells of the lungs, right? Out in the body it was cells. So what did we do to put blood vessels in touch with cells? What did we call that? Capillaries. Guess what your lungs are, guys? They're not big airbags inside your chest, okay? What they are is spaces, they're filled with capillaries. They are spots for the blood to turn around and come back to the heart after it's done something. We'll talk more about that in a minute, okay? When it does come back, what's it coming back through?
The left atrium.
It's going to come back into the left atrium, but
Through the aorta.
pulmonary veins, right? Because coming back from the lungs, vein means coming back to the heart. Pulmonary means from the lungs, right? So the name makes perfect sense, pulmonary vein. Coming back to the heart from the lungs. Okay? So it comes in, everybody meets in the left atrium here. Oxygenated blood. Now, notice that we've changed colors. We're red now. We went out as kind of a weird purpley color, I'm not sure why. And we came back as red. Okay? So we come back here. Atrium means we're entering further into the heart. So the heart can squeeze us and head out where? This tube?
Aorta.
Aorta. Guess what? We're back into our tree. We're back into aorta, arteries, arterioles, capillaries, venules, veins, vena cava. Right? We're out into that loop. Notice that there were two loops involved here. Two loops. And this shows it like it's kind of four loops because each of the loops where it goes out, one goes heart, out to the body, and back. Well, it goes in two different directions, right? One goes up, one goes down. So that's here, out to the body, come back to the heart. Out to the body, come back to the heart. Except that's not the only loop that it makes, is it? Because it's got to pick up oxygen. It goes out to the body, back to the heart. Out to the lungs to get oxygen, back to the heart. Out to the body to use up the oxygen, back to the heart. Out to the lungs to get more, back to the heart. Out to the body. You getting this whole pattern?
Yeah.
I'm feeling like I'm kind of repeating myself here. Okay. So this is the loops. This is why it's called a circulatory system, because it's circular. It goes out and comes back. Okay? It goes through two loops. The pulmonary loop out to the lungs, and the systemic loop out to the body. Okay? Just each of those goes in two different directions. Out to the body goes up and down. Out to the lungs goes right and left, because you got right and left lungs. Okay? All right, let's talk about what a lung is. Okay? We came to the idea that it's got to have capillaries, right? Because the blood's got to turn around. And I'm going to show you something about your lungs. I don't think you really understand what they look like. This is all the tubes of the lungs. Okay? Now notice you got the red and the blue. We understand those, right? Oxygenated, deoxygenated. Now in this case, they're reversed though, right? Because it's pulmonary. The deoxygenated is where they're going out to the lungs, right? and the oxygenated is coming back to the heart. Okay? So the red ones are headed back to the heart with the fresh oxygen. The blue ones are headed out to the lungs to get it. What do you think those white ones are? Because there's a lot of those white ones. What do you think?
Plasma?
Nope. What else goes into the lungs?
Air.
Air. This is this pipe coming in here. That's your windpipe, your trachea, coming down into your lungs.
Taylor Scruggs and Adrian Stroud, please come to the main office.
That's
Taylor
wonderful. That'll be
Scruggs
right in the
and
middle of our
Adrian
video.
Stroud. Thank you.
All right. So we've got the trachea that comes down in here. Because remember, what's the point in the lungs? We got to put air next to blood, don't we? So we can get that diffusion thing to happen. So we got to get air next to blood. So we've got to have tubes for the air. We got to have tubes for the blood. Because we don't want air wandering around loose in our body. Oh, very bad. We don't want our blood wandering around loose because that's called bleeding, and that's bad. Okay? It's got to stay in its tubes. So what happens is there are two sets of tubes to your lungs. Blood tubes, air tubes. Okay? The white ones represent the air tubes. Now, just like blood vessels, it comes in a trunk, splits. So we've got the trachea coming down. The two sides branch off, and they're called bronchi. And then, just like arterioles and venules, put that ol sound on the end of it, bronchioles are the names for the smaller tubes as they spread out. Okay? So now we have bronchi, bronchioles. It's the same kind of tree thing. I mean, it looks like the branches of a tree if you turn this thing upside down, right? Okay? Because here's your trunk, and then it splits, and you got all these branches sticking off. You got the same idea. You've got two of these, and they weave around each other. Because the idea is we've got to get down to that point where diffusion can happen. We need a teeny tiny, thin air tube. Now those air tubes, since you have to go in and out through the same tubes, they end in little bubbles. It's almost like bubble wrap. Microscopic bubble wrap. Okay? The air comes in, ends up in a tiny thing. But here's the way it works. That end of it is this teeny tiny little thing. It's called an alveoli. Okay? Alveoli, not ravioli, alveoli. Okay? Alveoli is just an air sac. It's where we push air into it in a really thin little pouch so that we can wrap a capillary around it. Now what happens in a capillary? With all these things, everything's so thin that, D word, what happens? Diffusion can happen, right? Now we've got this blood that doesn't have much oxygen, and we have an air sac that has a lot of oxygen. So where's it going to go? The air is going to go out. The oxygen is going to go out of the air into the blood, and the blood will move on and head back to the heart. Okay? You see how this works? Is the whole idea behind the lungs is to get an air tube touching a blood tube in a thin enough spot so diffusion can happen, where the oxygen can go across from the air tube into the blood tube. The carbon dioxide can go from the blood tube into the air tube so we can exhale. Okay? All right. That's going to be what we are going to talk about for today. That's the basics of where the things happen in the cardiovascular system.